Let's go.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today for the Bioenergy Australia in partnership with the Tasmanian Government seminar on the bioenergy opportunity for Tasmania. I will be speaking after the Minister, so I won't spend too much time talking about us and what we do and what we're seeking to do in terms of supporting governments in creating their bioeconomies. But to kick off the event, we are absolutely delighted to have Minister Guy Barnett, MP, the Minister for Primary Industries and Water, the Minister for Energy, Minister for Resources, Minister for Veterans Affairs, and obviously the Member for Lyons. So at that, I will now hand over to the Minister, and if I can ask everyone to pop their screens on mute and video off, or Lauren will be doing that for you. So over to you, Minister. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you for the warm introduction, and it's really great to be with you today for the first ever Tasmanian Bioenergy Future Summit. Thank you, Shahana McKenzie and the Bioenergy Australia for creating the program, facilitating today's online event. And that's the way we've been doing it during this COVID-19 pandemic. We've had to be versatile and flexible and pivot to the circumstances. So well done. Thank you also to the Australian Renewable Energy Agency and AgriFutures for funding this event through the Australian Biomass for Bioenergy Assessment project, and to the many attendees across Tasmania, across Australia, who share an interest in Tasmania's bioenergy future. So for those with feedstock to make bioenergy, and those that bring expertise across engineering, equipment and supply chain logistics to those seeking a solution in renewable energy, waste management, economic development or carbon mitigation that bioenergy can deliver. And I'm not sure that another field of endeavour that brings together so many diverse people and organisations with so many diverse interests as bioenergy. So all the expertise needed to develop a bioenergy future has been assembled here and is part of the network for those joining us today. That's fantastic. So being part of today's summit is a great opportunity. Use it to build your contacts, your networks, and tap into the bioenergy expertise and insights that across Australia we have already in abundance. And of course, a key point I want to push is that bioenergy is important as we play a role in Tasmania's energy future. Society generates biomass waste and residue from a range of activities we need just to live and to support ourselves, like agriculture, municipal, industrial and forestry activities. And it isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just a fact of life, or more so for living, that we will generate what is generally considered waste material. It's there and there will always be more of it, but to the greatest extent, we don't capitalise on it and we don't make use of it. And there's been much discussion about the circular economy and the merit of that. So we can move and do more in this space. Crop waste and remains, manures, sludges, rendered animal fats, used oils, food and organic waste, timber harvesting and processing residues, construction and demolition of woody waste can be used to generate bioenergy and bioproducts. We can create liquid transport fuel from using cooking oil and forest harvest and processing residues. We can create gas for heating and power from poultry farms, animal manures, brewery sludges, and dairy and meat processing waste. We can create heat from timber and agricultural industry waste residues and municipal waste to heat manufacturing processes and homes. We can create cooling from industry residues, agricultural residues and municipal wastes. A bioenergy facility can produce combinations of these energy sources. So bioenergy is the original, oldest and most versatile form of renewable energy. Bioenergy has the potential to displace fossil fuels in every market. Bioenergy is the world's primary source of renewable energy, providing approximately a tenth, I understand, of the world's total primary energy supply. Bioenergy has proven technologies across multiple energy sectors and has proven to be commercially viable and competitive in many jurisdictions around the world. At our disposal annually, we have at minimum 230,000 tonnes of municipal solid waste, 1.4 million tonnes of municipal liquid waste, 8,500 tonnes of crop and horticultural residues, 26,500 tonnes of livestock waste, 6.4 million tonnes of liquid manufacturing waste, and 370,000 tonnes of solid organic manufacturing waste. So Tasmania, I'm proud to say, is soon to produce 100% renewable electricity based on our wonderful hydro developments and our growing wind farms. So being self-sufficient in renewable energy is fantastic, and we have plans to grow that to 200% by 2040. Bioenergy allows Tasmania the opportunity to decarbonise the remainder of our energy use. Some old school energy sources like gas and diesel can potentially be replaced completely in the long term by bioenergy. With a large amount of biomass available for bioenergy production, a significant proportion of Tasmanian fossil fuel consumption, such as industrial heating, could potentially be displaced by Tasmanian-produced bioenergy, growing our economy while we transition from fossil fuels. The government has always been a strong supporter of bioenergy and recognises the substantial potential for growth in this sector. So you can see the potential of bioenergy is, and at least should be, important to Tasmania and Tasmanians. And as we've recognised that, which is why I'm pleased to announce today that we've already set the wheel in motion to develop a Tasmanian bioenergy vision. This will form the basis on which we create the business, environmental and social conditions needed to drive this industry forward. The first step we're going to take is talking to those that know. We're going to talk to the experts. We will talk to the experts in bioenergy. We'll talk to the experts in other forms of energy. We will talk to those with good ideas across all those industry sectors I've already referred to. And we'll talk with and learn more from that expertise. So I look forward to that in the months ahead. We recognise bioenergy can assist the government in delivering its commitments and priorities related to climate change, waste management, forestry, agriculture, regional development, COVID recovery, as well as energy, which is why we've opted for a whole of government approach. So to this end, we've tasked the development of the state's bioenergy vision to the energy team in the Department of State Growth. And by creating a special and dedicated focus on bioenergy within the state growth, we not only give it currency and backing, but we give it the access to the existing pool of cross-sector energy and regulatory expertise already within the department under the guidance of the Director of Energy Planning. So here it will have a dedicated focus, but one that is surrounded and supported by policy development and oversight of the energy sector. That is obvious, and that's why today's summit is aptly named Tasmania's Bioenergy Future. We've listened to the experts, chosen the development of the bioenergy vision as the first and best step to grow this sector so we, as Tasmanians, can reap the benefits into the future. So a bioenergy vision aligned with industry will help unlock and drive private sector investment to address the recognised gap in the market and to help create more jobs. The bioenergy vision will unlock private sector investment and accelerate the adoption of bioenergy in Tasmania, increasing employment, as I've said, reducing waste, reducing greenhouse gas emission, and producing more Tasmanian renewable energy. As flagged, as we push ahead with developing the vision, we will be seeking the best views and ideas available, and I trust that you will all stand ready to help with your expertise as it progresses, and I look forward to hearing more from you, and I know others within my government as well look forward to that. So thanks very much for the opportunity. All the best with the rest of today's special event, and congratulations, and this conference is now open. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We're absolutely delighted to have you open it, and also delighted with your announcement, and very much looking forward to working with you and the team. It has been fantastic working with Martin on delivering this event, and if that's anything to go by in terms of the level of enthusiasm and support down in Tassie to create this new industry, then I think we're in for some big things into the future, which is fantastic. So thank you very much for joining us, and yes, looking forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you.
Moving on with the rest of the event, so that we could jump into the minister as we had our little technical glitch initially, I'll now do a couple of little housekeeping things. So for those of you that have joined since we started, if you could have your videos turned off and your sound turned off, that would be fantastic, except for those that are speaking. I would also like to once again thank the Tasmanian Government for their support in delivering this event, as well as the ABBA project through AgriFutures, which is also supported by the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. This next session that is coming up, after that session, when we do have breaks throughout the event today, if you can just stay signed in, we just don't want to risk any more technical glitches with Zoom. So if you can stay signed in, but just have your video and sound off, unless you want to have a chat with someone, have a cup of coffee and have a chat, go for it. So at that point, let's just, there we go. I'm now going to jump in and give a very quick presentation myself. Lauren, just checking that that's coming through okay?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to give a really quick overview here in relation to bioenergy, I suppose, in Australia, and particularly around the drivers that are having an influence on why bioenergy is now getting a significant level of increased traction, I suppose, within the energy space. So Bioenergy Australia, we're the industry association for Australia's future bioeconomy. We have over 150 members, and we've seen a 300% increase in membership since 2017. We run a number of industry alliances, networks and committees such as the Renewable Gas Alliance. We run the Sustainable Aviation Fuels Alliance of Australia and New Zealand, the Cleaner Fuels Alliance. We're very active in terms of supporting government decision-making and policy development through particularly drafting of rather comprehensive submissions into government. So whether that's at a federal or a state level, obviously one of those that's relevant to this conversation is our recent submission into the Tasmanian Renewable Energy Target Draft. We are also incredibly active in terms of driving profile and media coverage for the sector in order to increase the level of understanding and awareness for other industries to consider the opportunity around bioenergy from, whether it is ag, whether it is fuel-based, whether it is energy space, whether it is circular economies and waste, whatever the case may be. And we are also Australia's representative body that participates across the International Energy Agency, TCP, on bioenergy. Now, for probably most people on the call, this is not new information, but for those of you that are here as a first time or still having a level of infancy in terms of understanding around bioenergy, effectively, the bioeconomy is taking a range of different organic feedstocks, waste residues primarily, waste streams and residues, using a range of different conversion technologies to produce a range of products. The most simple way, I suppose, to think about it is anything that we're currently producing from a fossil base could be produced from an organic residue or waste stream. So looking at that there in terms of there is, agricultural wastes all the way through to municipal wastes, wastewater treatment, forestry residues, meat processing and animal residues and the like. And the products that are really sort of gaining significant traction in Australia at the moment are around biogas and biomethane, biodiesel and renewable diesel, ethanol, obviously, and particularly around ethanol as the base product for hand sanitizer and a range of disinfectants, but also through to renewable heat, renewable electricity, and the like. Just diving a little bit deeper into those feedstocks that are available there, you can see there a little bit further in terms of what the primary feedstocks are across each of those different streams. Bioenergy Australia also isn't, I suppose, restricted to only speaking about organic feedstocks. We do have a number of members that are also taking end-of-life tyres, end-of-life plastics, and producing a range of other higher value products from those as well. Looking at bioenergy on a global scale and where Australia sits, at this stage we are down the bottom of the list in terms of our performance globally around bioenergy production. In saying that, the way that we choose to look at that is that there's a huge potential. And the positive from our perspective in terms of that huge potential is being 10 to 15 years behind, as we are in some of these areas, it allows us to leapfrog technologies, to be able to really begin the journey in Australia with cutting edge technologies, taking lessons from other countries that have implemented policies or that have implemented, certain approaches that we can now see to really deliver what is going to be the right solution for Australia. I'm quickly going to touch on, before I move to Matt from ARENA, some of the drivers that we believe have really been seeking to that have been enhancing the level of engagement, particularly for us, but also more broadly in terms of bioenergy in Australia. So last year in November, the Federal Energy Minister, Angus Taylor, announced the development of the Commonwealth Bioenergy Roadmap. That's currently under development, and Matt will speak to that a little bit further, but obviously that just in itself is a trigger to market, to potential developers, to state governments, local governments, that this is an area that is now being seen with significant interest from the federal government, which hopefully will then roll to enabling policies and the like. Another significant shift that we have seen that has been driving a conversation around circular economies, around waste minimisation, is the China sword. And initially the refusal of recycling product going to China, but also beyond that, then having the knock-on effect of Australia having to really reconsider how we manage our waste and treat our waste. And in some ways, the state governments were already sort of much further progressed down that path in terms of considering things. But we're now seeing that there is this Commonwealth approach around waste strategies and implementation, such as a 40%, 50% reduction in organics to landfill, which we see is going to, require the presentation of a whole range of solutions in order to be able to manage that. And certainly bioenergy is one of those that should be at the front of that list. Another, which, even as recently as 2 weeks ago, the announcement of the BP refinery closure. And obviously the government has been working very hard in order to be able to look at policies to be able to drive or support the domestic oil refining industry in Australia continuing to operate, particularly through this harsh time. But as we've seen, it's a really tough game for them. And the flip side to that is the ability for renewable fuels to operate at a different scale, to be able to deliver within the region that they operate in, and to be able to really support fuel security in Australia. A recent QUT report from 2017 showed that if we had a nationally 10 mandate as an example, that would increase it would decrease our reliance in terms of imports by 18%. Obviously, another significant sort of shift that I would say that has taken place over the last couple of years has been the movement away from us having a debate around, is climate change real, to what are the solutions that are going to get us to where we need to be. And that's a really positive thing from our perspective, and that we absolutely have a seat at that table around supporting particularly areas that are incredibly difficult to decarbonise through other means. You know, the transportation sector, as an example, is a key area that in Australia we need to do some work on in order to bring down emissions. Similarly, looking at things such as decarbonisation of the gas network, and we'll hear from Kate later on that one more specifically. An interesting thing that has taken place around COVID for us was this real sort of shake, I suppose, to the system in terms of us having a level of understanding around how vulnerable we can be as a nation when we're placed in a situation where imports may not be flowing into the country. So there was a 40-day period where effectively imports from China on hand sanitizer were not taking place, and there was a very quick pivot that was done by the Australian ethanol producers, which really did in itself highlight to us how vulnerable we are and how exposed we are, and what role should we be playing in Australia in terms of strategic industries that are important into the future, that we need to be ensuring we have that base level of production in order to protect us in the event of things taking place. Obviously delighted about the advanced manufacturing announcements by the federal government, and Bioenergy Australia is putting in a submission on how we feel that the bioeconomy could really be supported through that. And really important one, particularly for Tasmania, one of the beautiful things about bioenergy, it is regionally exclusive. This is about jobs in the region. This is about investment in the regions, and it is around being able to keep people in regions where they want to be. And so the bioeconomy, and one of the reasons for advocating for the development of the bioenergy roadmap, was really to look at what role can Australia's bioeconomy play in creating jobs for regional Australia. Looking at global drivers, the aviation and marine industries have both set a target of 50% reduction in emissions by 2050. Now that's a significant thing, and in terms of if we look at hard to decarbonise sectors, there probably isn't a sector that is any harder to decarbonise than the aviation sector, and that biofuels, particularly sustainable aviation fuel biojet, can play a significant role in. Just to give you a bit of an insight, which I'm sure in the session a bit later on biofuels specifically, one of the speakers will touch on it, but if you look at the fuels and the pathways that are currently approved and operating at a global level, those fuels can be blended up to a 50% blend. So we're not talking about small 1 or 2% here, we're talking about significant quantities of potential fuel. And the feedstocks really being any of the feedstocks that you could imagine you saw in the earlier slides, and utilising a range of different technologies or processes. Similarly, in marine, I know we have Steve Rogers from Licella, who is going to be speaking in the biofuel section in relation to the role for Tassie to be producing its own renewable fuels for marine, which I think is going to be a fantastic presentation. So in terms of, I suppose, doing that as quickly as I could, because we had a little bit of a late start, thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully that's given you a little bit of an insight in terms of the drivers that have brought Australia's sort of potential bioeconomy to the front. And with that, I will hand over to, Matt Walden, who is our chief person working on the Commonwealth-funded bioenergy roadmap for Australia.
Thank you very much, Johanna. Very much appreciate and always look forward to talking at your events. So congratulations to you and your team on preparing today's great event. I'll just bear with me and I will share a couple of slides, noting I think that we've got some time for Q&A at the end as well. So I'll make sure I get through in time for us to answer any questions that any of the participants may have. So just as Johanna mentioned, I'm an investment director at ARENA and have the pleasure of looking after our bioenergy and energy from waste portfolio. And during the course of the next few minutes, I'll give you a bit of context on ARENA and our investment priorities, and I'll appreciate a number of people probably have that background, so I'll be quite quick through that. I think very relevant as well in terms of the recent announcements regarding ARENA and some of the Commonwealth Government's views around technology investment roadmap, and I'll provide a bit of information on that. And then I suppose a bit of context and some thoughts around where the bioenergy roadmap is tracking and our anticipated timing to which we'll be able to have that disseminated to market to allow people to start forming views on how they can facilitate moving the sector forward. And as I said, I'll make sure we have some time at the end to answer any questions that our participants may have. So just by relevance and background, I'm sure people are familiar. ARENA is a Commonwealth Government agency with a mandate very much focused on renewables. I'll show in a second how our strong portfolio in energy from waste and bioenergy fits together, and has been one of the cornerstones of our investment processes. And importantly, and I think Bioenergy Australia has played a critical role, is to disseminate knowledge. So knowledge is a key purpose of our organisation. So we're always very keen to make sure we're speaking to influential parties like Bioenergy Australia and Bioenergy Australia's members to disseminate and allow other people to form views to facilitate investment. Where are our current investment priorities? So this is basically where we must invest currently, and I'll get to a bit of context going forward. And importantly, bioenergy touches on each of these. So the first one, integrating renewables into the electricity system, as the name suggests, very much electron focused or national electricity market or the relevant markets in Western Australia. And obviously bioenergy does currently play a role in that space. If you think about the electricity angle that bioenergy represents, and obviously the critical role that it can play going forward. And I'll talk, for example, a reference projects that we've supported in Western Australia with the Clean Energy Finance Corporation in terms of large-scale energy from waste, again, supporting the electricity system. Accelerating hydrogen, so again, a very topical point, and it seems to get a lot of constant attention from various governments and industry participants. We actually do have a project that uses biomethane as its primary feedstock resource into that process with Hazer, which is an ASX-listed company that's looking to develop a new emerging technology. And lastly, supporting industry to reduce emissions, and I think is actually a very critical one, and one where bioenergy has strong relevance to. And there's obviously a number of reference projects that we've supported and ones that we haven't supported, which are the projects that we like. So just ARENA on a page, and I appreciate there's a lot of information here, but this is all available on our website. Invested over $1.6 billion to date, total project value of over $6.6 billion. So one of the key things we look for is that leverage, and ensuring that every dollar that we put in generates significantly more in terms of private sector investment. Bioenergy, as you can see, there's a very well represented portfolio of $128 million invested to date. And that's everything from earlier stage R&D activities through to the pre-commercial activities that we've worked on with the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. So very relevant, and going back, I think it was a few weeks or a month or so ago now, the Prime Minister and Energy and Emission Reduction, Minister Taylor, made an announcement regarding the forward funding of ARENA, and in the region of $1.6 billion for ARENA to invest over the coming 10 years. And so a very positive note, a very positive signal for our organisation, a very positive signal to industry around the role that the government sees ARENA playing, and again, supporting other organisations such as the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, the Emission Reduction Fund, and the NAE, for example, as well as other organisations. And importantly, linking to the government's release very soon thereafter of the Technology Investment Roadmap document, which is available on the industry website, and the document that in effect sits on top of that being the Low Emission Technology Statement. So this is where the government, through some extensive research and market soundings, has formed a view around where are some of these opportunity areas that that we can work on as a country going forward to drive emission reduction and investment value. So these concepts will become the cornerstone of ARENA going forward. And obviously these, particularly the Low Emission Technology Statement, will be a document that evolves and is refreshed, and there's an expert panel that the Minister has formulated to assist in refreshing that document. And where we're at at the moment is, I suppose, going through a strategic process to really define and give clarity to industry and how we transition from our existing investment priorities through to an environment where we're much closely aligned with the Low Emission Technology Statement. We'll obviously maintain all of our existing frameworks and decision-making processes, but obviously there's a lot of strategic thinking that needs to go into the process to allow us to be able to quite clearly say this is where we want to invest and how we want to invest, and come and see us if you've got a project or initiative that aligns with our relevant priorities. So just pivoting to bioenergy, and again, I think pinching a couple of Shahana's key themes that she mentioned as well, and we're really getting into the nuts and bolts of this with the Bioenergy Roadmap, is just what role bioenergy plays as part of Australia's energy system. And I think it's important to flag energy rather than electricity here, because bioenergy's key strengths is its ability to support all forms of energy. And Shahana mentioned hard to abate sectors such as aviation, road transport, heavier transport, gas displacement, etc. So it's very important to think of bioenergy on an energy displacement basis rather than merely an electricity basis. And as you can see on the right-hand side there, just what types of bioenergy plays a role in the current industry consumption. So manufacturing, as you said, that's very much the sugarcane sector is a key role there. And on the fuel side, where certain ethanol and biodiesel initiatives are starting to be seen. But again, the opportunity here is quite significant, and that's one of the key elements we're looking to identify as part of the Bioenergy Roadmap. So, and this is just a grab and no particular order here, but really to say that bioenergy as a concept represents many different things. It's not merely going to an electron, it's not going to a litre of fuel, it's not going to a gigajoule of gas equivalent, but very broad concept, from the range of feedstock opportunities that bioenergy represents, the range of conversion technologies that are there, and the range of end uses. So I suppose you'd call it the diversification opportunities are absolutely significant. Obviously the location of certain resources, the end users, put bioenergy in a very strong position to actually generate quite significant value add. So if you think about waste or bioenergy as a resource, in some cases a free or a negative cost resource, it's again looking at that, how can you leverage that resource or that opportunity into a higher value proposition. And here are a range of technologies and projects that we've supported to date. In the bottom corner there, anaerobic digestion at a meat processing plant. The top two being Australia's first large-scale MSW to electricity projects. Again, generally seen as very mature technologies, but in the Australian context, zero reference plants. So we see these as landmark projects that will then hopefully be reference projects to support larger scale deployment. Logan City Council, we're looking to innovate in ways in treating biosolids to meet waste code obligations. So again, a very exciting project that's capable of high replication potential. And Southern Oil Refining, who's looking at a number of initiatives to support the development of a renewable fuel sector. So now to the roadmap. And where we're at in the roadmap process at the moment is we've, and on the next slide I'll give a bit more context, is we're in the process of finalising drafts of the report. We're completing some economic modelling that's quite comprehensive. But the purpose of the Bioenergy Roadmap, I think, is very relevant, and Minister Taylor, who's the minister responsible for ARENA, very clearly had some ideas and focus areas that he requested that the roadmap look at to assist his understanding of the sector and where those opportunities sat, but as well as providing some guidance to other sector participants, including, importantly, state governments, local governments, industry participants, Shahana and her industry association, to support how do we actually move this sector forward. So key to this is really understanding what is this opportunity, what does it represent, what does it represent in terms of jobs, regional development, emission reduction, what role do fuels play. Shahana mentioned dual security. Again, understanding what all these potential benefits are, and then articulating ways to which we can then start to unlock these benefits. So one thing that we were very overwhelmed by, and in a very positive sense, was the level of interaction we've had with industry. We've had a number of consultations and interviews with people. We've had a number of Zoom forums, which in I suppose the post-COVID world is the way it's done now, and significant levels of written submissions as well. And that's been everyone from individuals with views and perspectives through to large organisations, government organisations as well, trying to putting forward their views and perspectives as to how they see the sector, what the opportunities are for themselves, and what they would need to unlock those opportunities. So 70% of those submissions were flagged to be made public, and we're actually in the process now of getting all those ready in a format that can be easily downloaded for people to see and understand. So that's another work stream that we have going on at present. Where have we sort of, and this is starting to work towards how we'll present some of the findings in terms of where have we actually started to see some of these key themes and opportunities emerge. And I think these are relatively self-explanatory, but I think provides a very helpful way of dissecting the opportunity. So the industrial heat and trying to displace emissions in the industry, the electricity opportunity. So again, how can it be complementary to a future decarbonised or an electricity system? The transport opportunity, and again, importantly here, really understanding how does bioenergy or biofuels work in with other technology pathways that are likely to be relevant. So whether you call that battery electric vehicles or fuel cell electric vehicles, how does bioenergy play a role, and if so, what role? So again, giving some clarity to say we're not necessarily here to compete, we're here to be complementary, and this is where it's likely to play. So again, Shahana mentioned aviation as one of those key opportunities that's likely to be a relevant avenue of investigation. And lastly, the gas network, biomethane, and there's a couple of speakers talking on this later on, is what role can bioenergy play in supporting a decarbonised gas network? And I think, again, important to flag a very complementary rather than competitive conversation with, for example, the role that hydrogen may play. So the Bioenergy Roadmap will investigate that and understand what that opportunity looks like as well. So we're on track at the moment to have the roadmap completed prior to the end of the year, and obviously from there working with all key stakeholders to facilitate a pathway to making the document and its associated files and components public, and obviously then we'll go on a roadshow to industry, including everyone on this conference, to articulate what those findings are and look to answer any questions in further detail. So Shahana, I might pause there. Hopefully I haven't gone over time, and welcome any questions whether now or at the end of the session.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Matt. And I can see that we are getting quite a few questions over there in the chat function over on the right-hand side. So I will manage those after we have our next speaker, who it sounds like, according to the Minister's announcement this morning, is going to be very busy into the future, which I'm very excited about. So I would like to welcome Martin Moroney, who really has been an incredible asset in Tasmania for us, and we're delighted to be working with him into the future in driving Tasmania's future bioeconomy. So over to you, Martin. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Shahana, and thanks, Matt, for your presentations and your introductions. And thanks, everybody else, for attending. I'm here to talk about the ABBA project and give a bit of an introduction into the types of technologies that are used to make bioenergy from biomass. The ABBA project is a national project that aims to provide the link to the biomass to the supply chain and the end producer. So it's right around the country, people have loaded up the types of biomass that they have that could be made available for bioenergy. And I'm the Tasmanian representative for that, and I'm in the process of trying to update that. So these, you can see there what the project's goals and objectives are, just to make people aware that there is biomass for sale. So if you are a landowner or you're representing a landowner who might have some biomass that they wish to make available for bioenergy, let me know. We'll get it up onto the into the data set, and it might provide a source of revenue for your landowner or business. So we have in the biomass, in the ABBA project, we have all of the various forms of biomass listed. From agricultural, forestry, municipal and industrial. They're available on the national website, the AREMA website. There's a URL there that will be made available in the presentation after we're all done today. And I'm in the process of updating it. So again, please, if you are a landowner or represent landowners or have provided data in the past, you want to update it, please let me know, and we'll make sure that that data is kept up to date. This is where you find it. You find it at the URL above. I can't give you a URL directly to the biomass page, so I'm going to show you how you do it. You select agree at this stage, then you select add data, which is up in the left-hand column, and then you select renewable energy, and then you select Tasmania, and you get left with a choice of various fuels. And here is one for food processing, and you can see it shows you in the regions to hide some commercial in confidence material, but it shows you where each of the various types of biomass can be found in what sort of abundance in around 4 or 5 regions in Tasmania. And that has helped a number of people who are seeking bioenergy solutions find them. They've come through the ABBA project, come through and found my details on the website, and we've helped them link them to people with biomass for bioenergy projects. So please, as I've said before, if you have some data or know or represent people that might have data, please promote this opportunity. It helps us find some feedstocks, helps us make some more bioenergy projects reality, and contribute to all those various things. So Tasmania has the potential to make a lot of bioenergy. This is from a paper that Andreas Roth published some years ago, and it shows that we can produce perhaps 5 times more bioenergy from wood than we currently do. Currently, we're traveling around about 6% of our total energy supply, and we could get up to about 30% using the types of fuels that are shown here. Now, below here, the electricity is only around about 42% of our renewables. So we still have 34% of our total energy coming from oil, 4% from gas, and 10% from coal, which can all be displaced to a degree by bioenergy. And that's where bioenergy has its strengths, and where the ABBA project and the fuels that are accumulated can help people fill those gaps and decarbonise our economy. But other than forestry, this is essentially the list that the Minister has read out in his presentation. This is all taken from the ABBA data set, and it is incomplete because we haven't had 100% compliance. So there's yet more biomass to make bioenergy available in Tasmania than is shown here. So it's quite considerable, and you will see that it's not just forestry. So the making of biomass, or making of bioenergy, we've got wet biomass which can make biogas in anaerobic digestion, and we've got dry biomass that can make heat in boilers or equivalents, and we've got lignocellulosic waste that can make transport fuels through a number of different processes. And what I wanted to show you here was some anaerobic digestion images that I've taken off the web, and the point that I'm wanting to make is that you've got some that are very, very large, such as the one on the right-hand side, to some that are down at the farm scale. So an individual enterprise, an individual dairy or a farm grower can actually make his own bioenergy from his biomass wastes, whether it be manure or cropping waste through anaerobic digestion. And I think that's a key. That's a key I think that many landowners might not be aware of. And I'd like anybody who has a farm or a piece of land to consider bioenergy. And there are a number of installations around the state. And if you're using anaerobic digestion, you can use a variety of feedstocks, and you can produce a variety of energy sources, including fertilizer, which is left over from the biogas, the digester. We can also make it out of, well, as I said, we can make it out of quite a lot of feedstocks. So there's quite a bit of diversity available in what you can make, what you can anaerobically digest. So there's a number of Tasmanian industries and landowners that could make their own bioenergy from their own wastes. Then we have combustion, and I've shown this again to show the big variety of scales. You've got the scale from the top right, which is a large incinerator in downtown Denmark, to smaller household scale or enterprise scales, whether they be down to heating a home or a group of homes or a hospital, which is happening in the bottom left, or a greenhouse in the top left, or just your house if you wanted to. The variety is out there, and that's the thing that I wanted to leave with people, that there's a huge variety of scales and applications that in many cases we're not realising the benefits in Tasmania. And the feedstocks are also quite abundant, and these, as the anaerobic digestion is being discussed in more detail in breakout room 1, and the boilers or making biomass from solid or dry feedstocks discussed in more detail in breakout room 2 later in the day. But we also can make transport fuels. We can displace almost any fuel that's made from fossil fuels, whether it be for driving your car, driving a ship or an aeroplane, and that can be made out of lignocellulosic wastes or fats and oils. And these are fuels that can be added directly into your engine, as we've described. They're effectively indistinguishable, or they perform the same function as fossil fuels. There are 4 main pathways that are out there at the moment. Some of them are becoming quite competitive, and they also produce some valuable byproducts, which might also be worth considering if you've got a large amount of these types of fuels. There's a lot of talk about going to different engines, and we may well. In fact, I think we will, but we're still selling internal combustion engines, and they have a significant lifespan. And so if we want to decarbonise these existing engines, then we're going to have to start thinking of making a clean fuel for them. And even if we do get other vehicles out, there's going to be likely to be a place for transport fuels in heavy haulage, in shipping and in aviation anyway. And this will be discussed in more detail in breakout room 3. And that's what I just wanted to say to you, and thank you all for coming. I believe we're open to questions, but Shahana, I'll give it back to you now.
Great, thank you so much. So I will now just run through a couple of the questions that we've received, and I might just direct them. I'm not going to deal with some of the questions that we have here because I feel like they're actually going to be dealt with in presentations in each of the breakout rooms that are taking place. So, but there is one here that I thought would be a good one for you, Martin. What are the main economic barriers to using forest waste for energy rather than just allowing it to rot down where it is located?
So I think we have a real possibility to utilise these wastes if the market were aware of the energy specifiers, were understood that bioenergy was where it was competitive. I think we've got a lot of people seeking energy solutions in Tasmania who simply can't find a bioenergy solution being put to them, or it's not quite well developed enough. We've got quite a number of bioenergy facilities in the state, but probably not enough for the state specifiers and energy procurers to have confidence in it. So we just need a few more. And then once we start getting a few more, we'll be in a position where we can get the supply chains more used to dealing with woody residues and more considered, and it might make them get cheaper. In my mind, they're the main reasons. We've got such an abundance of feedstock, such an amount that's being left to decompose in the way of people and wasted, if you like. We just need to figure out how to get it in front of people's specifiers' minds and make the supply chain cheaper.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Martin. Hey, Matt, I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So does ARENA have any plans to support smaller projects under $100,000? Yeah,
Shana, great question. I mean, there is no restriction on a dollar quantum in terms of a minimum project size, and we've supported everything below that to obviously many millions above that as well. I think there's probably broader questions around having the conversation around what is the opportunity, what are the implications, what are the restrictions, how does it align with our mandate, etc. So would be very more than happy to, for the person that asked that question to shoot through an email to myself. And I know my colleague, Amy Philbrook, is also on the line. So one of the two of us would be more than happy to provide a bit more detail and context.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Matt. And just another question that we've had here is, what is most lacking, biomass feedstocks or facilities to convert them to energy?
It's a great question, Johanna, and this has come up as part of the roadmap analysis work. So I think I would even extend that to a third limb and say the end use of that as well. And there's an electricity network usually pretty close to everything, but I think it's having all three of those in an environment that provides for a commercial, social, and an environmental benefit. And that's sometimes a challenge, is how do you actually bring those three elements together that delivers a viable solution. So I'm going to sit on the fence and say all three of those, Shahana.
Yeah, good call. Okay, well, I think when we look at all of the other questions and comments that are in there, I think most of those are going to be dealt with in the sessions that are coming up. So we now have a break for 15 minutes. If people can, feel free to have your camera on if you'd like to, and have a chat amongst the room if you'd like to. But we will be kicking off our next session at 10:15 with Diane Glenn facilitating that, who is from Corelli Consulting. And this is going to be a really interesting session because it's around how do you actually get that project going? What are the financing and the drivers out there in terms of offtake that will support actually driving those projects through? So yes, thank you very much, everyone, and looking forward to joining you all back here in 15 minutes.
Hello, this is the next session, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the session on investing and driving offtake for bioenergy. The first speaker is Matt Irvine, and Mac is part of the investment team at the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. Mac leads the waste and bioenergy platform, leveraging his corporate and investment banking and advisory background at KPMG, Barclays Bank, and the NAB. Thanks, Mac.
Thanks, Diane, much appreciated. And I just want to make a quick thank you to Bioenergy Australia and the Tasmanian government for hosting and supporting today's session, and also to everyone on the line for joining in and giving up part of your day for this session today. So maybe just to spend a minute or so on who the CEFC is. So for those who aren't aware, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, or the CEFC, is an Australian Commonwealth government-owned $10 billion green bank investing across the green economy. We were established approximately 8 years ago. To date, we've invested roughly $8.2 billion of lifetime commitments into the green economy and deployed about $6 billion of that. So the way we're established effectively is, as I mentioned, across the green economy, specialising in different sectors and technologies. So we have, for example, a infrastructure team, property team, wind, solar, manufacturing teams, etc. And then I guess more relevant for today's discussion is the waste and bioenergy platform, which is the platform of the CFC that I lead. And that effectively looks at every investment opportunity with a feedstock, technology or processing application and an output. And that could be both energy and non-energy. So for example, it could be anaerobic digestion, large scale energy from waste, liquid biofuels in terms of your energy outputs. And then also looking at, for example, composting and plastics recycling as non-energy outputs. Since inception of the CFC, we've invested in approximately 3 gigawatts of renewable energy. So primarily solar and wind transactions, but also the 2 large-scale energy from waste transactions that the CFC financed in the last 2 to 3 years. Roughly speaking, 18,000 small-scale projects across a range of different sectors that I mentioned there through our aggregation partnerships. And I think what's also important to mention here is similar to what Matt Walden mentioned earlier in terms of the market impact and the leverage. So for every dollar that the CFC has invested over the last 8 years, we've attracted approximately $2.30 of private sector capital. And that really goes to the purpose of the CFC in terms of driving more private sector financing into the green economy. This slide here is a pretty simplistic slide, but it just goes to show, I guess, some of the inherent complexities of the waste and bioenergy process flow. So we've got a range of different feedstocks, a range of different technologies processing those feedstocks and a range of outputs. So for example, biogas, electricity, heat, liquid biofuels, etc. I mean, many of you probably know this already, and some of you are operating in some of these sectors. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but just to give a really quick snapshot of the sorts of things that we look at. And as I said earlier, I guess the diversity of this sector. But primarily all of those sorts of things need to lead to some sort of economic outcome to be commercially viable, or otherwise, as we know, it's very challenging for investors, whether it's debt or equity, to be investing in these sorts of projects. This slide here is what we call a typical project finance structure. So this is, again, I appreciate it looks like a bit of a busy slide right now, but at the same time, this is actually just kind of the tip of the iceberg when it comes to project financing structures. So on the left-hand side, we've got the SPV, or the special purpose vehicle, as we call it, or project co. So that's effectively an entity that's established in project financing structures to enable the delivery of the project. On the left-hand side, we've got equity and debt coming in as total project capital into that vehicle, and then dividends being paid to equity or loan repayments to debt. The key contracts at the bottom there, you've got your EPC and your O&M primarily. So that's your EPC being construction and O&M being operations and management. And for other sorts of projects, for example, a waste project, you're going to have waste supply agreements or other sorts of feedstock agreements and things of that nature. And then on the right-hand side, we've got the cash flow components being revenues and costs. Again, there are many things that go into this, but just really simplistically, we've got a few on the right-hand side there. So if your project, for example, is a waste gate fee derived project, then you'll be receiving revenues for that waste as opposed to it going to landfill and people paying for it. You've also got your black energy sales and your green sales, or your LGCs and certificates, and then a variety of different sorts of costs involved in the project there. So as I mentioned at the start of this slide, whilst it does look a little bit busy on face value, it is actually pretty simplistic in terms of project financing structures, and happy to kind of answer any questions at the end of the session and talk to any more of that in detail. But this is just a really good snapshot for people to consider when they're looking at either investing in projects or developing projects. These are the sorts of things that are inherent in all projects. This slide here looks at what we call a typical project development process. Again, a very simplistic slide just to kind of talk through the key concepts. This is absolutely not an exact science by any means. Every person who develops a project will look at this slightly differently. Every project will be different in terms of the sorts of things that you need to do. But again, just to putting on a single slide here for anyone who's either currently developing a project and thinking about the sorts of things that they need to continue to develop, for example, or people who are, starting out looking to develop a project. These are sort of some of the key concepts. So starting at the top left here, we've got the concept phase as you start to really think about the concept of the project you want to deliver, pre-feasibility and feasibility phases. So these, again, are the sorts of things that you need to undertake to give yourself a high level of confidence that the project will be, commercially and economically viable. And these are the sorts of things in the top left here that need to be completed before you even approach any investor, whether that's debt or equity. In those stages, you may be eligible for some grants. So, for example, through an ARENA grant funding system or other state or federal-based funding systems, those are the sorts of phases that there may be grants available. You then start to work through approvals phases for planning and environment, as well as your due diligence and financial modelling phases. And then you get onto your project document processes, including your EPC and O&M, feedstock, and importantly, your offtake. And at that stage, you're starting to have your conversations with equity and debt subject to the requirements of the project, because you've actually got enough kind of key project components there for people to get interested. So as you can see, there's a fair bit of work that goes into your project development process before you even start to approach investors. CFC takes a slightly different view to that, given the nature of our role in the marketplace being more of kind of industry development as opposed to just investing. So very happy to have conversations with people who are developing projects and give them a little bit of guidance, shall we say. So we're not a financial advisor or commercial advisor by any means, but we have, a fair bit of knowledge in the marketplace and obviously having, invested in projects over the last 8 years. So happy to engage with people a bit earlier in the process, at the appropriate time to kind of step through some of those key components. We then move into our contractual close phase, which is effectively signing investment documents, and then financial close when you close up all the conditions precedent for funding, and then you move into your construction phase and later on your operational phase for the project. So this slide here talks about the offtake bankability factors. So these are the kind of the 4 key things I see in terms of what your project is going to need from an offtake perspective to make it interesting to investors. And we've effectively got on the left-hand side here 4 key risk factors, as well as what would be considered a low risk and a high risk for an offtake. So in terms of tenor, so tenor is effectively the length of your contract or your offtake. So in this case, a low risk contract would be one that had a long tenor. So for example, 10 or more years, whereas a high risk contract would be either no contract or a merchant style of arrangement or a short tenor contract. In terms of the counterparty risk, an investment grade off-taker, so for example, a large corporate with a very strong balance sheet that is going to be around, or at least a very high degree of confidence going to be around for the life of your project or whatever the contracting timeframe is obviously a low risk factor compared to a non-investment grade off-taker. Volume and quantity is also really important. So if I was to take an example of a biofuels project, if you were to contract a full volume contract and was fixed for the life of the offtake, so if you had 100 million litre per annum plant, for example, with a 10-year contract for the full volume of your offtake, that's obviously a very strong offtake position as compared to a merchant or a no volume contract. No volume or merchant position or a limited volume contract, because then you still effectively have a volume of fuel that you need to sell into a marketplace somewhere that's not contracted. And last but not least, obviously, is the price you're being paid for your output. So, a high fixed price offtake escalating over time is obviously a much lower risk position than what would be, no firm price support or low price fixed duration of the contract. So, again, pretty simplistic in terms of the way that this has been described here, because there is obviously, a negotiation process and contractual frameworks that need to come into play. But again, just to give people a bit of a steer in terms of their offtake, in terms of what they're looking at and what they think they can achieve in the marketplace, this is a really good guide in terms of what would be considered as low risk or high risk factors when thinking about an offtake. I think the other thing to mention too is that in the bioenergy sector, broadly speaking, offtakes are very interesting in terms of the type of offtake. So from the energy side, whether it's gas, liquid fuels, electricity, steam, etc., all of those sorts of contracts are going to be different in terms of the way that they're structured and the outcomes of those. The other thing too is for any projects, that may have a byproduct which isn't an energy output. So for example, an anaerobic digestion project that has a digestate coming out the back of it. We often see people, obviously trying to drive the highest value possible, because that's what, your project is ultimately going to depend upon. But it might be actually looking at offtake in terms of, well, if my project is economic enough that I don't actually need to generate a revenue stream from that, but I can actually minimize my potential liability, then that's definitely something to consider as well. So again, whether it's, ash coming out of a large scale energy from waste project or digestate coming out of an anaerobic digestion project, for example, those sorts of things don't always attract a revenue stream. But if you're able to enter into contracts, even getting rid of it at a $0 value, is subject to your project still being economically viable. If you remove that potential massive liability from your project, these are the sorts of things that need to be considered when you're looking to develop your project. This slide here just goes through a bit of a summary of CFC deals, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this except to say that, again, the comment I mentioned earlier around the sorts of offtakes for projects, given the kind of diversity of this sector. So this is a bit of a snapshot of that as well, in terms of that type of off-taking arrangement, as well as the sorts of deals we've done. So on the top left hand side of this slide here, we've got our two large-scale EFW projects, and both of those are electricity outputs. On the top right, the Cecilia Group project is a composting project. So again, it's a non-energy output and it's a composting style of byproduct. And then down the bottom there with the Resource Co project, that's a processed engineered fuel output. So again, there's a lot of complexity and diversity in terms of bioenergy in the sector more generally. So the way that you think about your investability, bankability, offtakes, structuring, development, etc. These are the sorts of things where we always advise people to get the right sort of advice. So whether that's from financial advisors, legal advisors, commercial advisors, etc. When you've got your project through your kind of early bankability phases, we would always advise people to have those sorts of conversations. And as I said, I'm happy to have early stage conversations with people about some early guidance from an impartial investor's view in the sector as well. And then just a couple of contacts there for myself and my colleague Joe O'Neill, who lead the sector. Otherwise, that's me done.
Thank you, Mac. That was a great presentation. Our second speaker is Michael Froud, Director at Pittwater Capital. Michael has an investment background in water and bioenergy project development, as well as infrastructure within the circular economy. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Can you see my screen? Can you see the screen now?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you very much. Let's just make sure we get that up fully for you. So just go here. Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to the presentation. So what I'd like to talk to you about here is, as an equity investor excuse me. I'll try and put up the right slideshow. Okay, good morning, everybody. I essentially work between project developers and infrastructure funds, specifically working from the investment of private equity coming into projects. When we look at these are typically waste organic streams to digestion to produce renewable gas. What we're typically finding is projects are in the range of 30 to 50,000 tonnes per year. CapEx is 25 to 40 million Aussie dollars. And for majority of infrastructure funds on its own, that sort of project is not, does not fit into their investment space. Because by the time you bring in debt, these are relatively low investments from an infra space. So what we're seeing is the emergence of platforms or holdco structures where we would see multiple projects coming under the same infrastructure fund within the portfolio. So that's how we're seeing it. And so what the infrastructure funds are looking for is certainty of projects and deal flow that's coming through that. To underpin that and to echo the points that Matt was just talking about there, it's the certainty of the quality and quantity of feedstock over the long term that is going to be a key driver for this. It's rare for me to see a project that doesn't have good gate fees become a bankable project. So yes, you will get a feed-in tariff perhaps on the biogas, but if the gate fees are not sufficient to help finance this project, I think it's a problematic for you to get this across. I think the other point I'd just like to talk to you about is on the digestate side as well. Mac just mentioned that the digestate on a anaerobic digestion plant can be a large liability in the project. So feedstock is key, but understanding the digestate route and disposal is going to be key in anything that you look at here. So perhaps just to pick up some of the other areas down here, and Max spoke to some of this. So the commercial structure of this will be some form of take or pay structure, feed-in tariff basis around that. Max spoke to the counterparties side. Financial models will be required with any investor looking at this from an investment returns perspective, and you will need to understand full capex and the revenue that goes along with that. Perhaps I would also like to talk to you about the technology provider and the operator. So when an investor goes into projects such as this, these are long-term investments, 10, 15, 20 years. And so having an operator who is an equity investor in these projects, but minority, and that gives good alignment for the investor and gives certainty that they'll be there for the longer term. And I think that is a key thing for you to be thinking through. So if I just reiterate those points, infrastructure funds will be looking for your feedstock under sustainable basis, both quality and quantity. You'll need gate fees, and you'll need to understand what the feed-in tariff would be for those. And then understanding on the waste, on the digestate side, exactly how you're going to manage those risks. So revenue and feedstocks there. And then when you move into the project here, and Matt spoke to you briefly about this. So EPC and project companies, project management programs you're going through, staging the payments for milestones as you go through the development of the project, and it's typically a 12 to 18 month development side. So normally you would see the infrastructure fund providing capital at various stages, key milestones through that process. And then when you're in the operational phase, the operator there providing good management reporting systems and overview and an asset management program so that you can easily see and understand what's going on in the plant and making sure the capital maintenance areas are maintained. So I think I would summarize this in saying these are not easy projects to do. They're complex, but getting the right investor alongside and the right experts around to assist through this. This is definitely an area where infrastructure funds in particular, with a focus on environmental social governance, is increasingly becoming a key parameter for them. Then these areas for opportunity are highly interesting to the market, and you should find plenty of people interested in them, so long as you get this due diligence done at the front end. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Michael. Our third speaker is Kate Daly. Kate has been a manager of the Tasgas retail division. Tasgas is a specialist natural gas retailer operating in Tasmania and regional Victoria. Kate has a breadth of experience in roles in the public sector, including in Treasury and Finance, Department of Infrastructure and Energy and Resources, and she brings all of that experience to us this morning in her presentation. Thank you, Kate.
Great start, rookie mistake. Forgot to actually take myself off of mute. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement. I acknowledge and pay respect to the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional and original owners and continuing custodians of the Tasmanian land, and acknowledge elders past and present. I'd like to start off with an overview of TasGas. TasGas comprises a vertically integrated structure with a network distributor and a retailer. We have the newest gas networks in all of Australia, and we have 9 networks that are connected to the Tasmanian gas pipeline. Tasmania's gas network predominantly services industrial customers who account for 80% of our use. Industrial gas use is predominantly for heating of water, which is used in the manufacturing process. Total commercial and industrial and residential demand in Tasmania is less than 7 petajoules per annum, and our gas use is a small fraction of that of other states, which makes it Tasmania a prime test bed for renewable green gas networks and all of the potential R&D opportunities that can come from that. Tasmanians have a great appetite to decarbonise. Clean and green is fast becoming part of our identity. It's part of our brand. 95% of our industrial customers have a published commitment to sustainability, with some setting carbon reduction targets. Natural gas has played its role in transitioning Tasmania to a lower carbon future, displacing diesel and coal generation previously used by industrials for efficient heating. We now have the opportunity to further transition our customers to a carbon neutral future through the replacement of natural gas with green gas. So this is sort of segueing from Mac and Michael's presentations of actual projects and a good segue into this afternoon's or this morning's breakout sessions. We are specifically interested in looking at 2 of the opportunities for green fuels, being biomethane and hydrogen. And as Matt from ARENA touched on, that we've got the opportunities of hydrogen and biomethane as our decarbonisation pathways. So TasGas networks are predominantly plastic. We have a high degree of confidence that we can take up to 100% hydrogen. This gives Tasmania a unique competitive advantage. We have the ability to be the first green gas networks in all of Australia and perhaps the world. 100% hydrogen can only be used when we have confidence in the safety of 100% hydrogen supply and the commercial issues of cheap capital and electricity are addressed. Until then, the green pathway is a combination of hydrogen and biomethane. With Tasmania's growing agricultural industry, the creation of a biomethane industry could be a real possibility. The first step in assessing the viability of a biomethane industry will be an in-depth analysis of all available landfill gas and organic waste matter that is available for anaerobic digestion. The information from the ABBA biomass analysis that Martin referred to is very helpful, but we need more detail to enable the assessment of commercial opportunities. So for all of those people that were checking out Mac and Michael's presentations regarding projects, the key thing I'd like to highlight is that TasGas is open for business. We would welcome the opportunity to work with people that are interested in trialling projects in Tasmania to decarbonise gas networks. We want to, TasGas is at the beginning of its natural to renewable gas transition. We have 9 discrete networks, which gives us a unique opportunity to trial different projects on different networks with different customer mixes. We have some networks that only have industrial users on them, and others with industrial and small amount of residential and business customers, to a combination of industrial, business and residential mix. So that we're in the information collection stage at the moment to develop our own decarbonisation pathway, and we look forward to hearing from anyone who would like to collaborate with us. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the session today.
Thank you, Kate. We're open for questions now. I thought I'd open the questions by asking about the significance of feasibility assessments, meaning the technical feasibility assessments, the legal due diligence, the environment and social impact assessments on the investment readiness, I guess, of various projects. And I sort of throw that open to the three speakers.
I'm happy to go first. Thanks, Di. So I think from an investor's perspective, there's a lot of that groundwork you mentioned in terms of the feasibility phase, generally speaking, and the components that go into that before an investor will kind of take a serious view, shall we say, and work through their own internal investment committee processes and those sorts of things. So as I said, the CFC takes a slightly early stage view in terms of, you know, having discussions with people in industry to talk through what that could look like and the sorts of things that they need to be considering to get to investment ready phase. But and we, at the same token, we're also not suggesting people need to come to us with a fully baked project before they say, hey, can I have some capital to get the project away? The reason being that we've seen some instances of people going down a pathway which ultimately they think means the project is investment ready, and then it turns out it's actually not bankable because of the way it's been structured. So the pre-feasibility and feasibility work is fundamental to all of that in terms of making sure at a high level that they believe the project is ultimately going to be economically viable, and then working through, you know, each of those sorts of processes. So I think that engaging advisors along the way is important too, recognising that you don't want to be tying up a lot of money too early, but at the same time, if you're going to be investing, you know, your own time and your own money into these sorts of things, and engaging, you know, some sort of advice, whether it's commercial, legal, financial, etc., to support that feasibility process is important, because that's the key first step in your project development cycle before you kind of get to investment ready phase and engage your debt and equity investors.
Great. Thanks, Mac. Michael, do you have any comments about how you would rank those feasibility assessments in your investment considerations?
Well, I think echoing Mac's comment there, first of all, early engagement with the investors is critical. This is a well-trodden path for investors. Mm-hmm. And so don't reinvent the wheel as you're going through this process. You know, I'm sure Mac would say it same as I am. We're happy to engage early to make sure it's shaped well in the future. It's not a cheap process for you to go through to develop these projects to a stage where investors will come in. And it's often multiple years for you to get to that stage. I would prioritize in terms of feasibility would be on permitting, mm-hmm. and particularly and planning around the sites. It's the counterparty on the feedstock, absolutely critical. I cannot tell you how many projects come to me which don't have long-term contracts or even the ability to develop those, because there's not been a understanding of the available feedstock within the area to then feed into there under a fixed contract. So that is going to be critical as you move through there. And I found it quite interesting to listen there with regards to Martin and the ABBA process. I was trying to think of a suitable ABBA song to give a reference to, but I failed miserably, I'm afraid. Only Waterloo came up to me. But actually, that said, I really think we can find if you can focus on feedstock and you look at your permitting, those are the two big key things I would put in.
Thanks, Michael. Kate, do you have anything to add to that from, say, a government or a government perspective in terms of, say, environmental and social impact assessments?
No, I can't speak to that perspective, but certainly mm-hmm. working from an investor owner, so mm-hmm. the owner of TasGas is an investor and is keen to look at projects for the future of TasGas that really focus on those elements that Mac and Michael have outlined. So for us, it is around just ensuring that the commercial hurdle rate is there, and then diving into the risk assessment and the likelihood of success in assessing the projects as they move forward.
Thank you. That's great. Another question is around the nature of private investment. Mac has said that the CEFC likes to encourage, or the purpose of it is to encourage private investment. Are there specific issues pertaining to risk around foreign investment in bioenergy projects and infrastructure in Australia?
I don't think so much on the international side. And to be fair, to Michael's point earlier, this is a very well tried and tested path internationally in terms of bioenergy, generally speaking. So I think we're actually seeing a lot of kind of interest and appetite from international investors. So, for example, the two large-scale energy from waste projects in Western Australia that CFC was a lender on, both the equity coming into those projects, which is a kind of the key investment, is primarily international. So I think that they have a much better understanding of bioenergy and the sorts of structures and investment structures, et cetera, that are needed, given that they've done it, many times historically overseas. The challenge we have in Australia is that, I guess, typically these sorts of projects, like your smaller scale bioenergy projects, are just that. They're subscale for a lot of investors. And to Michael's point as well, they are inherently a lot more complex, generally speaking, compared to solar and wind investments, because that feedstock component is quite tricky to put together in the right way, as is the offtake. And, for let's call it a, $5, $10, $20 million project compared to a $100 to $500 to $1 billion wind or solar project that has inherently less complexity, that's kind of where their interest can go to sometimes. So from an international perspective, we're seeing probably more appetite than the Australian investors, generally speaking, because I think that this sector isn't anywhere near as well understood in Australia. And the complexity point, as I've mentioned, in terms of actually raising capital. And I think the other challenge we have in Australia is just a lack of sophisticated developers. There are absolutely some people out there who kind of know what they're doing and putting them together, but for the most part, it's not as sophisticated as it is, globally. And I've had some conversations with people in the market in the international jurisdictions who've said that they've got 15, 20, 25 developers coming to them all the time with projects that have a high degree of closing. We don't have anywhere near that number because it is more of an emerging sector in Australia. So I think that there's all the way along that chain, from developers all the way through to investors and everything in between, there needs to be, a bit more sophistication in that, which is the role that the CFC and others play in the market, and the role that these sorts of, conferences today are being held to try and support that as well. So look, CFC absolutely has, and we can be, a sole lender to projects and do it ourselves. But again, that's not the role of the CFC. We will do it if it means that it gets us to an end game of attracting more private sector capital, like we've seen in the solar and wind sectors and those sorts of things. But we are playing a much broader industry role here in terms of actually getting, the private sector moving to be supporting what is a critical sector in Australia.
Great, thank you, Mac. Michael, do you have any comments to make?
Yes, yeah, I would look at, again, echo Mac's comments here. There are a number of funds being created now for the bioenergy space in particular, particularly on waste organic diversion systems through to AD and gas to grid. They're generally overseas, European, quite often. Don't see any issues in that other than further approvals, but generally that's the only issue that you would think about in terms of overseas investors coming into the space. And I think particularly on the European funds, they understand the market. It's a far more mature market, 15, 20 years of investing in these sorts of projects. And overseas investors are seeing that the growth opportunity is coming here in Australia. It may not be today, but in the next few years, you could see increasing number of projects coming through. And so investors are watching the space and are interested to come into this space. So I would suggest to you that as the bioenergy industry becomes more mature in Australia, then I think there'll be no shortage of infrastructure funds wanting to be in this space. The issue will be scale and certainty that they can deploy a certain amount of capital in the market within some sort of platform structure or holdco structure. A one-off single project, $20 million from overseas investor on its own is probably not going to do it. But seeing funds aligning with technology will see this market evolve. And I would recommend that anybody who's looking at these projects make sure they've got a good track record with the technology developer, where there's good references that are sitting in there, well underpinned by a long-term O&M provider.
Great. Kate, do you have any comments that you'd like to add to that?
I think, you know, regardless of the source of investment, it is about that investor confidence in Australia. I think the guys have previously touched on it, but the rates of return on projects that we have here, the expectation is a lot higher for our Australian capital providers. And so even where we've had projects here in Australia with our previous owner, Brookfield, which is a large infrastructure owner, they were really attracted to projects in other countries that had or gave them higher rates of return than we're able to get here in Australia. And we have a lot of investment firms international firms that will come and accept a lower rate of return for projects here in Australia. But one of the key things for us is around, I think, for the development of the biomethane industry or bioenergy industry, is going to be having sort of firm signals, whether that's in you know, incentives to industry, policy frameworks, etc., that also give a high degree of confidence for the development of the industry. And I think we'll see investment funds flow from that.
Thank you, Kate.
Could I make one other point here as well? So Kate touches on a good point. I think when you look at the returns in the bioenergy space compared with solar and wind, if an investor wants to be in renewable energy, there are, at the current position in this marketplace, both in Europe and in emerging here, the returns for investors will be higher, in my experience, in the bioenergy waste organics AD type systems than they would get in solar and wind. So it's more complex, it's smaller, but it does give an opportunity for a fund to get a higher return than perhaps they would elsewhere.
Thank you, Michael. I think that also segues nicely with some audience questions around the role of the investor in driving the sustainable and renewable energy sector in the context of whether new or existing funds are driven towards fossil-based gas projects and other fossil fuel-based energy provision. So what is the role of the investor in driving that segment? Mac, would you like to make a comment about that?
Yeah, happy to. So I think, you know, the CFC has 3 key eligibility criteria, being renewable energy, energy efficiency, and low emissions technology. So we've got a pretty specific act and mandate, shall we say. So I guess I can't really talk for the whole investment community necessarily. I would say that at a high level, investors are, you know, generally moving towards more sustainable, more you know, green sorts of investments, shall we say. I think, you know, there's been announcements, even ANZ recently, talking about not wanting to invest in coal, new coal projects and those sorts of things. So I think the general view of kind of banks and equity investors and funders is moving more towards that kind of green economy, shall we say. So I think there's, you know, recognition globally for that. The CFC has a very specific role in terms of green investments and the way that we approach things. I think that if we also look at, just picking examples from the market, the fact that, you know, new solar today is cheaper than new coal would be. So yes, there are some challenges around intermittency compared to baseload and all those sorts of things. But from a pure economics perspective, in terms of levelized cost of energy production, etc., it's hard to form arguments for the role that some fossil generators are playing. In terms of gas specifically, again, there are arguments for both sides. So I'm not going to kind of, say one's better than the other per se, but, some argue that gas is an important, transition mechanism in terms of supporting the greater rollout of solar and wind and other intermittent types of projects and creating that stability, if you like, of energy delivery. Others, for example, say that's not the right sort of transition technology. And I'm not sitting here today saying either is right or wrong. I think the debate is still being held. So I think it's a really interesting time for people to consider which way that they're looking to go. And look, CFC specifically, we have, as I said, an act and a mandate that we need to adhere to. But at the same time, we're also an independent investor and have an independent investment committee and board. And so subject to not acting outside of our act and mandate, of which some of these technologies are prohibited, we will always take a commercial view that's in the best interest of the taxpayer, because ultimately we're custodians of taxpayer dollars.
Thanks, Mac. Michael, do you want to comment?
Yes, look, I think increasingly we are seeing investors willing to put some risk capital in what I call final mile development projects. I don't think you would see the private infrastructure funds involved in developing the market. I think Mac's far better positioned to be doing that within CFC, whereas the funds can come in because these are expensive projects in developing, but they won't get involved too early. But if you're in what I call final mile, so in the last year, if there is a well-structured project, you could see investors coming in and investing earlier in that project because they get a lower cost of entry into a project than one that's fully baked. But it needs to be part of a longer, more sustainable pipeline. It needs to be visibility that you can develop more projects than just the singular one. So the other thing I would say is the ESG focus of infrastructure funds, superannuation funds, will drive this, and it's difficult to find a area for investment better than waste organics to bioenergy than for an investor who's looking for ESG focus. So it's prime. It's very attractive to infrastructure funds. It's not easy, but we can get there.
Great, thank you, Michael. Kate, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Just from the Tasmanian context, I think we're very fortunate that we don't need natural gas as a transition fuel for energy and decarbonisation on the back of our hydroelectric, that the natural gas opportunity here is really to provide choice of fuel for Tasmanians. So we're in the fortunate position where what we're trying to do and decarbonise is actually in response to our customers. And I think that's the attractive value proposition for investors looking in projects for Tasmania, is that consumer appetite that will drive long-term demand for products, with gas being a flexible fuel source when we put it against electricity, the benefits that it offers. So I think that the customer is still key in terms of any investment opportunity and looking at the appetite. So we're very keen to understand here in Tassie the ongoing appetite of our customer base for green gas or gas as a source of fuel. As Michael's touched on, looking at the opportunity for green gas industry expansion onshore in Tasmania.
Okay, that's terrific. Thank you so much. We've got a final question here about the stage of technical feasibility in terms of risk assessment for the investor. And the question is, are there any institutional investors interested in the space of technology at TRL 7 to 9 that don't have a proven track record but are otherwise at that cusp? Mac, would you like to comment on that?
I'll be honest, I'm not too sure what TRL 7 to 9 means. Apologies.
That's all right. It's a technology readiness level, and it's right at the top of that assessment. So it's at demonstration scale, but not commercial.
Gotcha. Okay. So look, I'll give the CFC's view here. So our typical approach is proven technology with proven feedstock at proven scale anywhere in the world. That's kind of our starting point in terms of the investment thesis for investing. Not to say that we can't think about that at a high risk appetite, if you like, for projects, but it just gets a little bit more challenging. So the way that we typically look at it is, first of all, we can't provide capital for feasibility or pre-feasibility funding. That's something that ARENA may be able to provide, but that's not something we're able to do. In terms of views around pilot stage projects, demonstration scale and early commercialization, again, typically not the stage at which we invest. We're really looking for more commercially proven technologies. The natural response from some people to that is, well, hang on a minute, CFC should be playing a role in investing earlier. And again, I understand that. The challenge we have, though, is that the CFC is trying to, first and foremost, get good projects off the ground, given the relatively early stage, dare I say, emerging almost embryonic nature of this sector compared to other parts of the world. So to give you an example of large-scale energy from waste, we've only reached financial close on 2 projects in the last 3 years, and there are over 2,000 reference facilities globally. So we're actually looking to try and, almost drag and drop, shall we say, which some people might say, well, hang on, that's not really that innovative. And I appreciate that viewpoint. At the same time, for the Australian landscape and the Australian context, it is, given they're the first of their kind. So again, looking at anaerobic digestion, there aren't that many projects in Australia. There are over 10,000 in Germany alone. So again, we're trying to first and foremost look at, well, what are proven technologies, proven models that have been delivered globally? Can we essentially drag and drop those sorts of technologies and project models, et cetera, into Australia and get the sector moving, get the industry operational, look at some really good success stories? Because unfortunately, Australia's had some failures in the past from, as long as 20 years ago that people still talk to, which is unfortunate. So again, we absolutely can go further up the risk curve, and we have done that, numerous times in various sectors, across the CFC. But as I said, our starting point is that proven technology, feedstock, and scale globally for us to be thinking about. And then if we have to move away from that, we can. It's just a little bit more challenging and a little bit more diligence and time that goes into that. So hopefully that's answered the question sufficiently.
Yeah, indeed. It answered it very well. And I guess the thing is that when a sector is new, you need to rack up success rather than especially with government money. So, Michael, do you have a comment that you'd like to make? And we only have a minute for an answer.
Got it. Okay. So I would say this isn't a space for institutional infrastructure.
Okay.
Funds. This is more private equity led for the position, specific position you're talking to.
Terrific.
Here.
Thank you very much. Kate, a quick response?
None other than TasGas is open for business if somebody has some technology that they would like to trial with us or in partnership with one of our customers. Okay, that's great. I'd like very much to thank our speakers in ending this session, Mac Irvine, Michael Froud and Kate Daly. Thank you so much for your presentations and the time that you've taken in responding to these questions.
Thank you, Di.
Lauren,
Thanks.
I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Di. I really appreciate you facilitating that session, and thank you to all our speakers thus far. We are now up to the section of the seminar where we are distributed into our breakout rooms. So I've just got a holding slide here with a reminder of the 3 breakout room titles. I believe we will be opening the rooms in just 1 minute, but I wanted to let everybody know that if you don't get sent to a breakout room, you will remain in this current meeting room, and then I'll be able to have a quick chat with you to assign you to your preferred breakout room. So don't worry if you haven't been assigned one. But the host, James, will now be opening the meeting rooms, and you should be taken there automatically